Good morning, students.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, ma'am.
How are you all doing? You all are fine?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes, ma'am.
Set to come back?
ma'am.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Okay. So today we are discussing one of the topics of the abdomen, that is the large intestine or the colon. Can anyone tell what does the large intestine constitute of? What are the parts of the large intestine? What is the length of the large intestine? Anyone knows? What are the parts? Parts of the colon?
Ascending, descending, transverse colon, sigmoid colon.
Okay. So the large intestine or the colon, so is the distal part of the gastrointestinal tract which extends from the ileocecal junction, that is where your ileum enters the cecum. That junction is called as the ileocecal junction. From the ileocecal junction to the mucocutaneous junction of the anal canal or the anus. So this whole part constitutes the large intestine. So this large intestine is very long, of high caliber, around 150 centimeters in length or 6 feet in length or 1.5 meters long. So that is the dimension of the large intestine. So it includes the cecum, okay, the cecum, the appendix, the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, the rectum and the anal canal. Of this, cecum is around 6 centimeters, the appendix is around 2 to 20 centimeters, very variable length, 2 to 20 centimeters. The ascending colon is around 15 centimeters. The transverse colon is the largest with 50 centimeters. The descending colon is around 25 and the sigmoid colon is around 37 to 40 centimeters, and the remaining 3 to 5 centimeters you have got the rectum and the anal canal. So these are the parts of the large intestine. So this is how your large intestine is situated. So see, these are the parts. So this is the appendix, okay. This is the ileum which opens into the cecum. So this is the cecum. This is the ascending colon. This is the right colic flexure, the transverse colon, the left colic flexure, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon. This is the sigmoid. Then the rectum, the anal canal. So these are the parts of the colon. So these are the various parts which we have already discussed. So how we are going to differentiate between the small intestine and the large intestine? Can anyone tell what are the differences, gross differences? Anyone knows or anyone remembers what you have read? What are these? What are these bands? What are these bands called as? Anyone knows? Or these yellow pockets? What are these dilatations called as? No idea? Okay, so the three cardinal features of the large intestine are the tinea coli, the circulations of the haustrations and the appendices epiploicae. So these are called as the tinea coli. What are these tinea coli? So these are the thick bands of the or the aggregations of the longitudinal muscle coat of the large intestine. They form the bands. So they are called the tinea coli. The tinea coli is around 4 feet in length. Okay, so this 4 feet tinea coli inserts the 6 feet long large intestine. Hence, whatever the circulations or dilatations are there, they are seen because the length of this tinea coli is less, the large intestine is more. So to accommodate within that, you can see the dilatations or the circulations of the large intestine. So what are these tinea coli? The thickened band of the longitudinal muscle fiber. So in between there may be a thin layer of the longitudinal muscle also running between. So these tinea coli are of three types. One is called as the tinea libera, tinea mesocolica and tinea aumentalis. So there are three types of the tinea coli, that is tinea libera, tinea aumentalis and tinea mesocolica. In the vertical colon, that is in your ascending and the descending colon, the tinea libera lies in front, the tinea mesocolica on the posterior medial surface, and here on the posterior lateral surface you will be having the tinea aumentalis. So you can see here the mesocolic tinea. This is called as the tinea libera on the anterior surface. Whereas in the transverse colon, the tinea libera will lie on the inferior surface. The tinea aumentalis, this omental tinea you can see, this omental tinea or the tinea aumentalis lies on the anterior superior surface, and along the posterior surface here you will be having the tinea mesocolica. So these are called as the tinea coli. So these are nothing but the aggregation of the longitudinal muscle which is seen in the large intestine. It is classically absent in the appendix and in the rectum it is absent. Okay, tinea coli is absent in the appendix and in the rectum. Then next you have got the saculations or the haustrations. So these are the, wherever the tinea coli are present, there you can see the saculations or the haustrations, which are the dilatations which are seen in the large intestine. So these are the called as the saculations or the haustrations. So these are also absent in the appendix, in the rectum. In the rectum, appendix and in the rectum, you don't see the haustrations. Then you have something called as the appendices epiploicae or the omental appendices or the appendages. So these are the out pockets of the peritoneum, what you can see, which is filled with the fat. So they are called as the appendices epiploicae. So again they are absent in the appendix and in the rectum. So these are the three cardinal features of the tinea coli of the large intestine. So the tinea coli, the appendices epiploicae. So these are the fat-filled pockets. So they are absent in the cecum, the appendix, and in the rectum. Okay, and next you have got the haustrations or the dilatation. So wherever the longitudinal muscle is there, where the tinea coli is there, there you will see this haustra or the saculations. So these are all the haustrations what you are seeing. So these are the three classical features of the large intestine. So this will help you to identify the large intestine. So next, coming to the cecum. Okay, the first part of the large intestine. So that is the cecum. So usually in this large, you don't get a whole question as a large intestine. So you'll be getting the short notes. So in that cecum, appendix, the transverse mesocolon and the sigmoid mesocolon are usually asked, with some case-based scenarios you'll be seeing in this. So that we'll discuss. So first we'll discuss about the cecum. So what is the cecum? So it is the first part of the large intestine which begins as a continuous, continuous above with the ascending colon. So why it is called as cecum? Because it is a blind pouch. Okay, it is a blind pouch which is around 6 centimeters in length. So where it is situated? It is situated in the right iliac fossa. It is situated in the right iliac fossa, and mainly you will be seeing the opening of the appendix and the ileum in the posterior wall of the cecum. So behind the cecum there is a cul-de-sac or a recess of the peritoneum which is called as the retrocolic recess. So this recess often contains the appendix. So in 65% of the individuals, the appendix is present in the retrocolic recess. So now depending upon the, so what we have told, it is a blind pouch. So depending upon the shape, there are numerous names which are given to the shapes of the cecum. So one is called as the fetal type, which is seen in approximately 2% of the individuals, where the cecum is conical and the appendix will be arising as a straight tube from its apex. Then infantile type, seen in around 3% individuals, where the cecum is quadrate in shape and the appendix is arising from its depressed bottom. And the normal or the adult type, which is seen in 90% of the individuals, where the right sacule enlarges and the appendix is situated about 2 centimeters below the ileocecal junction, and the next is exaggerated, more like a normal, but there is an exaggeration where usually the right saccule hugely enlarges and hence the left saccule atrophies. So what happens? The appendix is very close to the ileocecal junction. So this here you can see in this figure. So this is the fetal type. So you can remember by the mnemonic, that is fine. This is the fetal, this is the infantile, this is the normal or the adult type, and this is the exaggerated. So you can see it is a conical, and the appendix will be arising. This is the conical cecum, and the appendix will be arising from its center. This is the quadrant type, okay, and this is the cecum which is arising from its depressed bottom, sorry, appendix. This is the normal type where the right saccule is enlarged and the appendix is situated 2 centimeters below the ileocecal junction. This is the normal type seen in 90%, and the exaggerated type where the right saccule is hugely enlarged and the left saccule atrophies. So what happens? This is appendix is very closely situated to the ileocecal junction. So these are the 4 types of the cecum depending upon the shape: the fetal, the infantile, normal, and the exaggerated type. Now coming to the relations of the cecum. So anteriorly it will be mainly related to the coils of the small intestine and the greater omentum and the anterior abdominal wall. Posteriorly, so posterior whatever the abdominal wall muscles are there, that is the psoas major, iliacus, and the vessels related to it, that is the femoral nerve, the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh, and the appendix is commonly found behind the cecum, that is in the retrocolic recess. Then you have got medially. So medially what will be there? So appendix is there, which is arising from the cecum, the terminal part of the ileum which is ending at the ileocecal junction, and there is an inferior ileocecal recess which is bounded by a non-vascular fold which is called as the bloodless fold of the treves, and above it will be continuous with the ascending colon, and below it will be resting on the lateral half of the inguinal ligament. So this is above, where it is continuous with the ascending colon. Medially it will be related to the terminal part of the ileum, and the appendix also will be arising from it. Okay. So these are the relations of the cecum. So these are the posterior relations, what you can see. So you have got the psoas major muscle, okay, the iliopsoas muscle, okay, and you have got the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh and the genitofemoral nerve, and you have got the femoral nerve, so which forms the posterior relations of the cecum. So when topographically it is situated, just I'll show the topography. Topography. So this is the all the quadrants of the abdomen. This is the transtubercular plane, which is this plane where I am moving the cursor. Which plane is this one?
Transpyloric.
Transpyloric plane. These are the 2 right lateral planes. So topographically, how you are going to locate the cecum? It is situated in an area bounded above by the transtubercular plane, medially by the right lateral plane, and below by the fold of the groin. So below, this is related here to the inguinal ligament. You can see here, this is the inguinal ligament. So this is the topographic relation of the cecum. Okay, above by the transtubercular plane, medially by the right lateral plane, and below by the fold of the groin. So this is the topographic relation of the cecum. Now when you see the interior of the cecum, so interior of the cecum, there are 2 features. So what will be the openings in the cecum? One, you have got the ileocecal orifice, and the other one is the appendicular orifice. So this is the ileocecal orifice. So where is this ileocecal orifice situated? It is situated in the posterior medial wall of the cecum at its junction with the ascending colon, and it corresponds with the intersection between the transtubercular and the right lateral planes. So this ileocecal orifice is guarded by a valve. So this valve has got a upper lip and a lower lip. So both the lips will be continuous as folds of the mucus mucous membrane which is called as the frenula. This is called as the frenula. Upper lip is horizontal and lower lip is concave above. Okay, lower lip is concave above. So this is the ileocecal orifice. Its transverse diameter measures around 2.5 centimeters. It is measuring around 2.5 centimeters. So this orifice has got two surfaces. One is called as the ileal surface and the other one is called as the cecal surface. So ileal surface is towards the small intestine, so it will be having the villi, and large intestine is devoid of villi, so the cecal surface is devoid of the villi. These are the two surfaces of the villi, lips, and each lip is formed by the reduplication of the mucous membrane and contains the submucous tissue with the thickening of the circular muscle and the projection of the longitudinal muscle of the ileum. So you have got the two lips. So this is the upper lip, this is the lower lip. This is called as the frenula. Okay, it is around 2.5 centimeters. So what will be the function of this ileocecal orifice? Can anyone tell? Anyone knows what are the functions of this ileocecal orifice? So this ileocecal orifice allows the flow of the contents from the small intestine to large intestine, that is from the ileum to the cecum, and it prevents the regurgitation of the cecal contents into the ileum. That is the main function of this ileocecal orifice. Then the other orifice what you are seeing is something called as the appendicular orifice. So this appendicular orifice is a small circular opening which is situated around 2 centimeters below and behind the ileocecal orifice. So this orifice is also guarded by a valve, small valve, which is called as the valve of Gerlach, which is called as the valve of Gerlach, which is situated along the lower margin of the opening. So these are the two. So this can be asked like the interior of the cecum. So there you have to 3 marks it can be asked. So there you have to mention the opening of the ileum, that is the ileocecal orifice, and the opening of the appendix, that is the appendicular orifice, and describe these two features. Okay, so these are the features which are noted in the interior of the cecum. So here important is the types of the cecum. Okay, so relations, just go through them once. Okay, and the interior of the cecum, that is the ileocecal orifice and the appendicular orifice. So next you have got the blood supply and the venous drainage, the lymphatic drainage. So the arteries. So arteries are mainly the anterior and the posterior cecal arteries which arise from the ileocholic artery, a branch of the superior mesenteric artery. So the cecum is developing from the midgut or from the hindgut? It is supplied by the superior mesenteric artery.
Midgut.
Develops from midgut. So that should be very clear. So it will be supplied by the superior mesenteric artery branches. So they are mainly the anterior and the posterior cecal arteries. So this posterior cecal artery will also supply the base of the appendix, and apart from this the anterior branch reaches via the ileocecal fold. So veins will be corresponding to the arteries and they drain into the superior mesenteric vein. Lymphatic drainage will be into the superior mesenteric group of lymph nodes, and nerve supply, so sympathetic and parasympathetic. So parasympathetic is via the vagus and sympathetic comes from the superior mesenteric plexus. So here you can see, so this is the superior and the inferior ileocecal folds here. So these the arteries will be reaching here. Okay, anterior and the posterior cecal arteries. Okay, so here the folds will be there, anterior and the posterior branches of the ileocholic artery. So this is the ileocholic artery. So this will form the anterior and the posterior branches, anterior and the posterior branches, which will pass via superior and the inferior ileocecal folds and the recess. Okay, so this was about the cecum. One more important thing what you should remember is all the Taenia coli, they will proximally, they will converge at the base of the appendix and they will act as a guide to identify the appendix. Okay, all the Taenia coli will proximally, they will converge at the base of the appendix and act as a guide for the appendix, and distally 5 centimeters above the rectosigmoid junction, they will form the all the these longitudinal muscles will form anterior and the posterior bands, which will reach the anterior and the posterior surface of the rectum respectively. Okay, so that is how the Taenia coli will end. Okay, and here it will form the they will converge at the base of the appendix, helping in the identification of the appendix. Okay, so this was about the cecum. Is it clear, the openings and all in the cecum? What are the openings? The types of the cecum, is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so next we have got the vermiform appendix. So most of you have heard it as a vestigial organ, okay, but it is one of the important lymphoid organs, okay, which is coming into action whenever there is any infections in your body. So this vermiform appendix is a narrow worm shaped blind tube or a blind diverticulum, and it is around 2 to 20 centimeters in length, average being 8 to 9 centimeters. So the length varies. So usually it is longer in infants and in children, and in the mid adults the length goes on decreasing, and it joins the cecum about 2 centimeters below the ileocecal junction. So here the three already we have told, all the Taenia coli of the cecum, they converge at the base of the appendix. So the one more thing is it is devoid of Taenia, though it is a part of the large intestine, it is devoid of Taenia coli, saculations and the appendices epiploicae. So it is suspended by a peritoneal fold which is called as the mesoappendix. So this is the peritoneal fold which is called as the mesoappendix. So it is opening in the posterior-medial wall of the cecum. So you can see there are no hostrations, there are no appendices epiploicae, and there are no Taenia coli. This is the triangular fold of the peritoneum which is called as the mesoappendix, by which the appendix will be suspended. So this is the mesoappendix. So mesoappendix is a short triangular fold and it is variable in length. It extends along the whole length of the appendix. So usually this breadth of the appendix falls short of the length. So breadth will short fall of the length of the appendix. So what happens, this appendix will kink upon itself, so giving a worm like appearance, hence the name has been given as the vermiform appendix. And whatever the appendicular vessels are there, they will pass through the free margin of the, so here the vessels will be passing, that is the whatever the appendicular artery is there, it will be passing through the free margin of the mesoappendix. This is short and the length of the appendix is more, so there will be kinking of the appendix, it will coil upon itself and give a worm like appearance. The measurement, so which we have already discussed, so it is around the 9 centimeters and it is relatively long in children and decreases after 40 years of age. Now surface anatomy, just like the cecum, so the you have to know the surface anatomy or the topographic anatomy of the appendix. So the base, it is the base because tip has varying position. So usually the base is always kept in mind because it has got a constant position. So the base is represented by a point about 2 centimeters below the intersection between the transtubercular and the transpyloric plane. Okay, this is the intersection of the transtubercular and the right lateral plane. So 2 centimeters below that you will be having the base of the appendix. So that will describe the topographic position of the appendix. Okay, intersection between the transtubercular and right lateral plane. So 2 centimeters below that you will be having the base of the appendix. So this is how, so you can see it is coiling and giving a worm-like appearance. Okay. Then next you have got very important something called as the McBurney's point. What is this McBurney's point? It is represented by a point at the junction of the medial 2/3 and the lateral 1/3 of a line which extends from the umbilicus to the right anterior superior iliac spine. So that is the McBurney's point. So what is its importance? So this point indicates the maximum tenderness in a patient suffering from the inflammation of the appendix. So whenever there is any appendicitis, so there will be maximum tenderness and the guarding in this region. So that is called as the McBurney's point. So this from the umbilicus to the right anterior superior iliac spine, the junction of the medial 2/3 and the lateral 1/3 will represent the McBurney's point. This is very important, McBurney's point. Okay. Next, coming to the parts of the appendix and types of the appendix. So this parts, it has got a base, body and a tip. So where is the base? So base is attached to the posterior medial wall of the cecum, 2 centimeters below the iliocecal orifice, and it is guarded by a wall which is called as the valve of the Gerlach. That is the base. This is the body which is narrow, tubular and has got a canal, okay, and which opens into the cecum. This is the opening of the appendix. Okay. Then you have got the tip. So this tip is least vascular and it is directed in based position. So tip is the least vascular part of the appendix and it has got various positions. So depending upon that, there are various classifications which are given. So something called as a subcecal and paracolic, 2% individuals. Most common is the retrocecal and the retrocolic. In the retrocolic recess, so it is seen in 60% of the individuals. Next is something called as the pelvic type, around 30%. More rare ones are the promontoric, mid-inguinal and the ectopic. So these are the various positions of the tip. This is on the tip of the appendix. So first, most common one is this retrocecal and the retrocolic, which is the interrupted lines what you are seeing. So this is the retrocecal and the retrocolic, where the appendix is situated behind the cecum. It's called as the retrocecal and the retrocolic, most common seen. So this is the first one. Then you have got, it is called as the 11 o'clock position. Okay, 11 o'clock position. Then you have got something called as the splenic type. This is the splenic type, which is seen around 2% individuals. So it has got a pre-ileal type and the post-ileal type when it is passing in front and behind the ileum. So pre-ileal variety is the most dangerous one because it will lead to the inflammation of the general peritoneal cavity. So this is the next, that is the splenic with the two types, pre-ileal and the post-ileal. Next you will be having something called as the pelvic, the most common type. This is called as the pelvic type, which is seen in 30% individuals, where the tip is directed downwards and medially towards the right pelvic brim. This is called as the pelvic. This is the retrocolic and retrocecal. This is the pelvic. This is the splenic type with the two varieties. This is paracecal and paracolic. What do you mean by paracecal and paracolic? It is situated or it is also called as a subcecal and paracolic, below the cecum and by the side of the ascending colon. So that is called as the subcecal and paracolic. So this is seen around 5% individuals. Promontoric means it will be directed towards the promontory of the sacrum, very rare type. And next here there will be one more type in the center, which is called as the mid-inguinal type. Mid-inguinal type. So these are all the various types of the appendix, and there is something called as the ectopic appendix due to the faulty rotation. So you may see appendix in various positions. So these are the, so I'll not go into that detail. So these are the various types of the appendix. So is it clear? So you have got subcecal and paracolic, retrocecal and retrocolic, splenic, promontoric, pelvic, the mid-inguinal and the ectopic types. So next you have got the blood supply. So blood supply is mainly by the appendicular artery. So it is a branch of the ileocolic artery. Again, it is a branch of the superior mesenteric artery. So this artery, it passes behind the terminal part of the cecum, the ileum, and it supplies the entire organ, and it also provides a recurrent branch to the base where it anastomoses with the posterior cecal artery. So this recurrent branch will anastomose with the posterior cecal artery. So this is said to be an end artery. So what happens? In the tip is least vascular, so any obstruction of artery will lead to the gangrenous changes which will be observed at the tip, because the tip is the least vascular side. Okay, so this is the arterial supply, which is mainly by the appendicular artery. Venous drainage, so it corresponds to the artery and drain into the superior mesenteric vein, that is a portal system of veins. Lymphatic drainage into the superior mesenteric group of lymph nodes. Nerve supply, this is very important, you have to remember. So parasympathetic is both by vagus nerves, sympathetic is via the superior mesenteric plexus, and from where do the preganglionic fibers come? The preganglionic fibers come from the T10 segment of the spinal cord. What does the T10 segment also supply? Anyone remembers? T10 segment supplies the
Umbilicus.
Yes, very good. So both somatic and visceral sensations are carried through the T10 segment. So what happens? Any pain in the any inflammation of the appendix will initially lead to pain in the umbilical region. First, their pain will be referred to the umbilical region because of this reason, because both the umbilicus and the appendix, that is the somatic and the visceral sensations, are carried through the T10 segment of the spinal cord. So the pain will be initially felt in the umbilical region, then that will relocate to right iliac fossa because of the local peritonitis or the inflammation of the local peritoneum. So first it will be felt in the umbilical region. So this you have to remember. Okay. So this is about the blood supply and the nerve supply. So this is the inferior division of the ileocholic artery, which gives the appendicular artery, which passes behind the ileum. You can see here it is behind the ileum. Okay, and it also provides the recurrent branch which anastomoses with the posterior cecal artery. So this is the appendicular artery. So this is about the appendix. So the case scenario I discussed in the last, which case can be asked for you all in this topic. So this was about the cecum and the appendix, very frequently asked question in the large intestine. I hope it is clear for you all. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
So next you have got the ascending colon. So ascending colon is around 15 centimeters in length, and it begins as the continuation of the cecum. It begins as the continuation of the cecum till it reaches the right colic flexure. So where it turns, so this is the ascending colon. It begins as the continuation of the cecum. It is around 15 centimeters in length. Okay, and it ends at the right colic flexure where it turns towards the left side. So this is the ascending colon. So this ascending colon has got the tinea coli, whatever we have discussed, that is the tinea libera, tinea mesopolica and tinea aumentalis. What three we have discussed. The front and sides is covered by the peritoneum, and the posterior wall. The posterior part is non-peritoneal and it will be related to the muscles of the posterior abdominal wall. So those are mainly the iliacus, psoas major, quadratus lumborum and the transversus abdominis muscle, and some vessels and nerves are there of the posterior abdominal wall, which are mainly the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thigh, ilioinguinal nerve and the iliohypogastric nerve. So these are the posterior relations of the, so you can omit them, need not remember. So usually ascending colon, descending colon, they are not asked as a separate question for you all. Okay, sometimes only transverse colon and sigmoid colon will be asked. So I am just going it fast, not focusing more on that. And anteriorly it will be mainly related to the coils of the small intestine. So that is the ascending colon. Next you have got the right colic flexure. So right colic flexure is also called as the hepatic flexure because very closely related to the right lobe of the liver. Hence it is also called as the hepatic flexure. So it marks the junction of the ascending colon and the transverse colon. Where it is situated? It is situated in the right lumbar region. Okay, it is situated in the right lumbar region. Topographically, this flexure is represented by a point about 2.5 centimeters below the transpyloric plane and 10 centimeters to the right of the median plane. So this is the hepatic flexure or the right colic flexure, 2.5 centimeters below the transpyloric plane and 10 centimeters from the median plane. So this is the hepatic flexure or the right colic flexure, what you can see. So it is situated at a lower level compared to the left colic flexure or the splenic flexure. This is the hepatic flexure. 2 centimeters or 2.5 centimeters below the transpyloric plane and 10 centimeters from the median plane, and it is situated in the right lumbar region. So right colic flexure lies anterior to the lower part of the right kidney and inferior to the right lobe of the liver. So this is the right colic flexure. Next you have got the transverse colon. So this is the transverse colon, which is the longest part, around 50 centimeters in length, and it is the most mobile part of the large intestine. So it is stretching between the right colic flexure and the left colic flexure. So it stretches from the right colic flexure in the right lumbar region medially for 5 centimeters to the left colic flexure in the left. So the left colic flexure, we have told it is at a higher level. So it is situated in the left hypochondriac region. So what happens, sometimes between these two flexures, a loop will be formed of the transverse colon, which may extend up to the umbilical region. So that is U-shaped or a V-shaped loop is formed by the transverse colon. Okay, so there may be looping. So between the head of the pancreas and the lateral end of the spleen, so the looping may be present. So the loop is suspended from the anterior body of the body of the pancreas by the transverse mesocolon. So this is the fold of the peritoneum which suspends the transverse colon from the posterior abdominal wall. So close to the lateral end of the spleen, what happens? It abruptly turns downwards and backwards and is continuous with the descending colon. It will be continuous with the descending colon at the left colic flexure. So this is the transverse colon, what you can see. So this is the U-shaped loop which will be formed, okay, between the lateral end of the spleen and the liver. So you can see this, okay. So now what are the relations of the transverse colon? This is the transverse colon. So anteriorly it will be related to the greater omentum here, okay, and the anterior abdominal wall. These are the anterior relations. Posteriorly it will be related to the head of the pancreas, the second and the third part of the duodenum, and the coils of the jejunum and the ileum. Posterior relations. So the second figure you can see. So it is related to the second and the third part of the duodenum and the head of the pancreas and the coils of the jejunum and the ileum here. So anterior relations, greater omentum and the anterior abdominal wall. Superior relations. So this is the transverse colon. So what will be the superior relations? It will be related to the liver, the fundus of the gallbladder, and the greater curvature of the stomach and the lower end of the spleen. Okay, this is the greater curvature of the stomach. And inferiorly it will be related mainly to the coils of the small intestine. This is the coils of the small intestine. So these are the relations of the transverse colon. So what are the differences between the right 2/3 and the left 1/3 of the transverse colon? So I think development of midgut is over. So you all know about the right 2/3 of the transverse colon. Left 1/3 is developing from the hindgut. Still hindgut is not over. Is it completed? Hindgut in embryology?
No, ma'am.
No. Okay.
No.
So just so this transverse colon is very unique. It has developmentally two parts are there. That is right 2/3 is developing from the midgut and left 1/3 will be developing from the hindgut. So left 1/3 of the transverse colon, descending colon, the sigmoid colon, all this will be developing from the hindgut. Okay. So the cecum, the appendix, the ascending colon and the right 2/3 of the transverse colon will be derived from the midgut. So the arterial supply will be from the superior mesenteric artery. So mainly the middle colic artery. Here the artery of the hindgut is the inferior mesenteric artery. So it will be supplied by the left colic artery. And nerve supply here, the parasympathetic is mainly by the vagus nerves and here mainly by the pelvic splanchnic nerves. Okay, so these are the differences between the right 2/3 and the left 1/3 of the transverse colon. Why you should know? Because developmentally they are different. Okay. So next you have got the transverse mesocolon. So what is this transverse mesocolon? So it is a fold of the peritoneum which is suspending the transverse colon from the posterior abdominal wall. So this is the transverse colon here what you are seeing. So this is the transverse mesocolon. This is the transverse mesocolon which is attached to the anterior border of the body of the pancreas and to the transverse colon and to the posterior surface of the transverse colon. So this will be the transverse mesocolon which is suspending the transverse colon from the posterior abdominal wall. So what are the contents? You can see there is a transverse colon. Here you will be having the middle colic artery which is supplying the transverse colon. Then you have got some fat, that is extraperitoneal fat, the nerves and whatever the vessels which are supplying the transverse colon will be seen in this transverse mesocolon. Now this transverse mesocolon, so this is the transverse colon here. Okay, you can see this is the borders and the surfaces, anterior border and the posterior border. This is the anterior border, this is the posterior border. Has two borders and two surfaces. Anterior border is attached to the posterior surface of the transverse colon and the posterior border. So this is the pancreas, yellow one what you are seeing here. Okay, these are all the coils of the small intestine here. Okay, and this is the stomach. Okay, so this is the transverse colon here. So anterior border is attached to the posterior surface of the transverse colon and the posterior border will be attached to the anterior border of the head of the pancreas, anterior surface of the head of the pancreas. Then the anterior superior surface and posterior superior surface, sorry this should be surface not border. There are two superior surfaces. Anterior superior surface is mainly related to the stomach which is separated by the cavity of the lesser sac. So this is the stomach, anterior superior surface. Posterior and inferior surface will be mainly related to the third and fourth part of the duodenum, the duodenojejunal flexure and the upper end of the root of the mesentery, and you have got the coils of the jejunum. So this is the transverse mesocolon which is suspending the transverse colon from the posterior abdominal wall. Two borders, anterior border and a posterior border, and two surfaces, anterior superior surface and a posterior inferior surface. So this is about the transverse mesocolon. Next you have got the left colic flexure. So left colic flexure we have told already. So it is situated at a higher level. It is more acute and more deeply placed than the the right colic flexure. So it is the junction of the transverse colon and the descending colon. So the left colic flexure is nothing but the junction of the transverse colon and the descending colon. Where it will be situated? It is situated in the left hypochondriac region. So this lies between the kidney, left kidney and inferior to the spleen. So it is also known as the splenic flexure. So topographically it is represented by a point about 2.5 centimeters above the transpyloric plane. Right was 2.5 centimeters below the transpyloric plane. This is 2.5 centimeters above the transpyloric plane and 10 centimeters to the left side of the middle line. Okay, and this is suspended by from the diaphragm by a ligament called as the phrenico-colic ligament. So that is the left colic flexure which is situated in the left hypochondriac region. So this you can see it will be situated at a higher level. You can see here. Okay, it is situated at a higher level. It is also called as the splenic flexure. It is situated in the hypochondriac region, in the left hypochondriac region. It is more acute. It is almost right angle. Okay, the hepatic flexure. So these are the differences between the hepatic and the splenic flexures. So that was about the ascending colon and the transverse colon. Shall I move on to the descending colon? Is it clear? Shall I move on?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes. So descending colon. So this is longer. It is around 25 centimeters in length, and it is deeply placed than the ascending colon. It starts from the left colic flexure to the left pelvic rim. So where it will become continuous with the sigmoid colon, or also called as the pelvic colon. Like the ascending colon, this is also covered by the peritoneum and front and the sides, and behind it is non-peritoneal, and it is around 3.5 centimeters in caliber. So this same relations like that of the ascending colon. So behind it is related to the iliopsoas, the quadratus lumborum and the transverse abdominis muscle, and it will be related to the iliohypogastric, ilioinguinal nerves, the lateral cutaneous nerve of the thighs. So just like the posterior abdominal wall, whatever the nerves and vessels are there, so same relations you have to mention for the ascending colon and the descending colon. So these are the relations. So this is how your large intestine is. So this is all the large intestine what you are seeing. Okay. So next you have got the sigmoid colon or the pelvic colon. So this is around 40 centimeters in length, and it begins as the continuation of the descending colon. It is named as sigmoid because it is S shaped, or sigmoid in shape. That's why the name has been given as sigmoid colon. So it starts from the lower end of the descending colon in the left pelvic inlet to the pelvic surface of the third sacral vertebra, where it becomes continuous with the rectum at the rectosigmoid junction. So from the third sacral vertebra, the sigmoid colon will continue as the rectum. So it is starting from the lower end of the descending colon in the left pelvic inlet to the pelvic surface of the third sacral vertebra. So it is, as we have already told, it is a S-shaped loop. So it forms a sinus loop, and it is suspended from the pelvis again by a fold of the peritoneum, which is called as a sigmoid mesocolon. Just like your transverse mesocolon, you have got the sigmoid mesocolon. So this S-shaped loop has got three parts: first part, second part, and third part. First part is running vertically downwards up to the left pelvic wall. The second part is transverse, which passes horizontally between the left to right pelvic wall, between the bladder and the rectum in males, and the uterus and rectum in females. And the third part, it runs obliquely downwards and backwards to the midline from the front of the third sacral vertebra. So that is the sigmoid colon. So this is all the sigmoid colon. This is sigmoid colon, what you can see. This is sigmoid colon. It is describing a S-shaped curve. So it has got a vertical part. This is the horizontal part, and this will be the oblique part where it will become continuous with the rectum at the rectosigmoid junction opposite the third sacral vertebra. So this is the horizontal vertical part which will be running downwards along the left pelvic wall. From the left pelvic wall to the right, it runs towards the right horizontal part. This is the oblique part. So this is the S-shaped curve of the sigmoid colon. So this is the sigmoid colon, or also called as the pelvic colon. So relations, it will be related to the anteriorly, it will be related to the urinary bladder in males, okay, and in females it will be related to the uterus, and behind it will be mainly related to the rectum. Okay, this is the rectum in both male and females. Then the sacrum. So you will be having the sacrum here. Then the external iliac vessels. External iliac vessels will be running here. So these are the anterior and the posterior relations. Similarly, of the first part, the second part, it will be related to the urinary bladder or uterus, and above it is related to the coils of the ileum. Third part is surrounded by the coils of the ileum. So these are the relations. Behind it is also related to the ureter. Okay, behind it will be also related to the ureter. So these are the relations of the sigmoid colon. So this is about the sigmoid colon. Then there is something called as the sigmoid mesocolon. So just like transverse mesocolon, you have got the sigmoid mesocolon, which is suspending the sigmoid colon from the posterior abdominal wall by a V-shaped fold, which is called as the sigmoid mesocolon. So it is a inverted V-shaped root or the connection. So this has got a left limb and a right limb and the apex. The left limb is attached to the left pelvic brim. So this is the V-shaped sigmoid mesocolon. So this will be the left limb will be attached to the junction of the descending colon and the sigmoid colon, that is the left limb which will be attached to the left pelvic brim, whereas the right limb is attached to the pelvic surface of the sacrum extending from the left sacroiliac joint to the middle third of the sacral vertebra. So this is the right limb. Okay. This is the left limb which will be attached to the junction of the descending colon and the sigmoid colon. This is the right limb which will be attached to the pelvic surface of the sacrum. Okay. So this is the right limb. The apex is situated in front of the bifurcation of the left common iliac artery and the left ureter enters the pelvic cavity behind the apex. Okay. So the ureter. So it is at the apex is at the bifurcation of the left common iliac artery and the left ureter enters behind the apex. So that is the sigmoid mesocolon, which has got a right limb and a left limb and an apex. Okay. Now what are the contents? So it contains the sigmoid colon, then the sigmoid branches of the inferior mesenteric vessels and the marginal vessels of the Drummond, branches from the superior rectal vessels, lymphatics and nerves supplying the sigmoid colon and the loose areolar tissue. So this small the sigmoid colon will be mainly supplied by the sigmoid branches of the inferior mesenteric artery, and apart from that the superior rectal also will be supplying the sigmoid colon. Whatever the branches of the superior and the inferior mesenteric artery are there, they will form something called as the marginal artery of Drummond. Okay, along the, I did not get a proper figure for that. Okay, so here you will be having the vessels. All these vessels will be there here. So these vessels along the border of the inner border here. So along the inner border of the large intestine, they will anastomose, that is the superior and the inferior mesenteric artery, they will anastomose and form something called as the marginal artery of the Drummond, D-R-U-M-M-O-N-D. So these marginal arteries will supply the large intestine, that is the ascending colon, the transverse colon, descending colon. These are between the branches of the superior and the inferior mesenteric artery. So this marginal artery will form two straight vessels. They are called as the vasa longa and the vasa brevia. Vasa longa will supply the outer 2/3 of the large intestine. Vasa brevia will supply the inner 1/3 of the large intestine. So whatever the vessels are there, they will anastomose here along the inner border of the large intestine and form something called as the marginal artery of the Drummond. Okay, so that is what you have to remember, which will be supplying the large intestine. Okay, so here they all will anastomose and supply the large intestine. So that is about the blood supply of the sigmoid colon. So it will be supplied by the sigmoid branches and it will be also supplied by the superior rectal artery. Then what are the contents of the sigmoid mesocolon? You have got the sigmoid colon and you have got the sigmoid branches of the inferior mesenteric vessels and the marginal vessels of Drummond, and the branches from the superior rectal vessels, lymphatics and nerves, and the loose areolar tissue. So these are the contents of the sigmoid mesocolon. So this is the sigmoid mesocolon. So this is in whole what I have described. So superior mesenteric and the inferior mesenteric artery, these are all the branches. Okay. So I have mentioned all this already. Next, coming to the important applied aspects of the large intestine. there is something called as congenital megacolon. Mega means large, or the Hirschsprung's disease. So it is mainly in the developmental stages. What is seen when the neural crest cells, they fail to migrate and form the myenteric plexus in the large intestine. So that will lead to the state of aperistalsis or the absence of peristalsis. So what happens? The normal proximal colon becomes dilated because of the fecal retention, causing abdominal distension, and the constricted section normally corresponds to the rectosigmoid junction. So that is called as it is mainly it is seen in the developmental stages where there is absence of the myenteric plexus. Okay, that is called as the congenital megacolon or the Hirschsprung's disease. Next, you have got the cancer of the colon. So it is very commonly seen in the Western world and above 50 years, commonly having a non-vegetarian diet. Okay, and it is a slow growing tumor which causes constriction of the colon. So it may spread to the liver because of the portal vein. Okay, so that is about the cancer. The next you have got something called as the diverticulosis. What is this diverticulosis? So it is the herniation or the small pockets of the lining mucosa via the circular muscle in between the tinea coli. So that is called as the diverticulosis. And so the herniation takes place where the circular muscle port is feeble. So and the inflammation of this diverticulum is called as the diverticulitis. So that is called as the diverticulosis. So you can see here small out pockets. So that is the herniation of the lining mucosa. So that is the diverticulosis. So volvulus means something which is getting twisted. Okay, that is called as the volvulus. So where a portion of the gut, it rotates clockwise or anti-clockwise on the axis of its mesentery. So what happens sometimes it is mainly seen in the sigmoid colon. Sigmoid colon is very susceptible to this volvulus. When it is long compared to the sigmoid mesocolon, what happens? It will start rotating or twisting. That will ultimately lead to the strangulation of the blood supply, and this will lead to the intestinal obstruction. So that is called as the volvulus, where a portion of the gut rotates on the axis of its mesentery. That is called as the volvulus. Okay, so commonly seen in the sigmoid colon. So you can see here, this is the twisting. Okay, when it rotates around the axis of its mesentery, that is called as the volvulus, and commonly leads to strangulation and the intestinal obstruction. Then intussusception. What is this intussusception? When a portion of the section of the bowel invaginates into the lumen of the adjoining distal section, mainly seen in the ileum and the cecum. That is, a portion of the ileum invaginates into the cecum and the ascending colon. That is called as the intussusception. That is telescoping of a part of a portion of the bowel into the distal section of the colon. That is called as the intussusception. So what happens? This might lead to the cutoff of the blood supply to the bowel and cause the gangrene. So that is something called as the intussusception. So you can see here, that is the telescoping. Okay, this is the telescoping of the small intestine into the large intestine. Okay, that is the intussusception. Then very commonly seen is the appendicitis. So what is appendicitis? It is the acute inflammation of appendix and is the most common cause for the acute severe abdominal pain. And where is the tenderness noted? It is noted mostly at the McBurney's point, okay, which corresponds to the location of the base of the appendix. So first the pain will be in the periumbilical region, then it will lead to the pain in the right lower quadrant or the right iliac fossa, and if it is not removed, it will become necrotic and rupture, very common, and resulting in the peritonitis. Then there is something called as the Soas test. What is the Soas test? So what happens whenever there is any retrocecal appendix, so the symptoms will not be seen in that much. So no much symptoms will be seen in them. So when there is extension of the right hip joint, it will irritate the right psoas major muscle, and there will be pain in that region. So that is called as the psoas test, which will be leading to pain in the at the McBurney's point. So that is called as the psoas test, which is positive in the appendicitis. Okay, so that is something called as the appendicitis. So one clinical case study I would like to discuss with you all. So this is how a question can be asked for you all on this. So a 25-year-old medical student came to the surgical OPD of a hospital with a history of acute colicky pain around the umbilicus, fever, very classical high grade fever, vomiting, and later the pain is located in the right iliac fossa. On examination, what the surgeon has found, an area of maximum tenderness at the McBurney's point, and psoas test was positive. He was diagnosed with acute appendicitis. Now, can anyone tell what is McBurney's point and was it its clinical significance? What is McBurney's point? Junction of a lateral 2/3 and the medial 2/3 and the lateral 1/3 of the spino-umbilical line. That is called as the McBurney's point. That is from the right anterior superior iliac spine to the umbilicus. So that is the McBurney's point. What is its clinical significance? Can anyone tell?
Maximum tenderness during appendicitis.
Yes, that is the clinical significance. Give the anatomical basis of an initial pain in the umbilical region and later to the right iliac fossa. Why it is seen initially in the umbilical region?
Both are supplied by T10.
Gain segment of the spinal cord. Oh yes, okay. So both visceral and the somatic sensations are carried through the T10 segment. So the whatever the pain is there, first it is initially felt in the umbilical region, later it is shifted to the right iliac fossa due to the local inflammation of the peritoneum or local peritonitis. So later the pain will be felt in the right iliac fossa. Name the various positions of the appendix. So just now we have described various types, that is a subcecal and paracolic, retrocecal, retrocolic, pelvic, promontory, midinguinal. So all those you have to describe. And what is the common incision given by the surgeons to perform appendicectomy? So this I will tell you all. There is something called as the gridiron incision, GRID, gridiron incision, which is taken perpendicular to the spino-umbilical line to expose the first anterior abdominal wall is exposed, then you can catch hold of the appendix. So that is called as the gridiron incision, which is perpendicular to the spino-umbilical line. Is it clear? So such case scenarios will be given to you all in the exam. So whatever the questions have been asked, you have to answer to it. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if you can find some more case scenarios regarding this, you can go through them. Okay. So thank you for patient listening. I think it was a quite long class. But remember, in this you will be mainly having questions on the cecum, the appendix, transverse colon and the sigmoid colon. Just go through them. Okay. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.